the waves they can interfere.
That's right, yes.
So if we notice in the background if there is somewhere where the gravitational waves interfere, then at the places of constructive interference, the effect could enhance. Otherwise, it's very small.
Well, I mean, that enhancement will not be that much, right? Because if you can detect gravitational wave, right? The interference effect will make it at least at most 4 times, right? You just add the amplitude, right? So the intensity will be 4 times instead of twice. But that's not that much of an enhancement, right? But for that you need to make sure that you have 2 coherent gravitational waves coming in. So eventually, once the gravitational wave detection is done, then one could do such experiments, right? To see if one can observe interference and so on. But right now the problem is to just detect any kind of gravitational wave.
To detect with 4 times is much, the probability is much higher than.
Yeah, but then for that you have to make sure that you interfere, right? And you may be in a region of destructive interference instead of constructive interference. Okay. And the point is we don't really have any control on gravitational wave. They are produced in the outer space, right? Because of some collision of stars or black holes. And all we are doing is to observe them. Right? So from that point of view, to make them interfere is not easy.
Yes,
Are there any other questions? Okay, so let me write down the action that we had derived last time. So we are studying the interaction of gravity with matter, and we saw that we can write down a single action which can produce both the matter equations as well as the gravitational field equations. And the action that we arrived at took the following form. So it had the gravitational part, which is minus 1/16 pi g. And 60 the minus so this has the feature that once we vary with respect to x, capital X, okay, then of course this is irrelevant, and we get the equations of motion for capital X, which is the geodesic equation. And then when you demand that the S is stationary under arbitrary variation of the metric, then we get the usual Einstein Hilbert term from here. So this gives you the R mu nu minus half R G mu nu is when you vary with respect to G mu nu, and this one gives the matter energy water potential. Okay, and this normalization has been adjusted so you get precisely the correct normalization. Now we can ask what happens if you have electromagnetic fields present. Okay. So for electromagnetic fields present, we know that the electromagnetic action, so Maxwell action in flat space, action in flat space time, is C times integral d4x sigma f mu f mu sigma. Is this familiar to everybody? right? If you vary with respect to capital mu, then you get the equation d mu or del mu f mu equal to 0. Okay, essentially you vary with respect to a. So f mu it gives you a partial mu of a nu. Okay, and then of course it's automatically antisymmetric, so you just get a factor of 2. Then you integrate by parts, and that gives you partial rho f rho sigma. That's this equation. Okay, the coefficient of delta nu gives you this equation. So given this form, and C is undetermined, right? Because classical Maxwell action, the equations of motion is not affected by C. Okay, so if you are just asking for classical equations of motion, then C can be arbitrary. So given this, we can now ask how to generalize this to curved space. Okay, that suppose you want the curved space equation, namely instead of wanting this equation, suppose you want d mu f mu equal to 0, which is the curved space equation of motion. How do you generalize it? And you can easily guess what the corresponding generalization will be. In curved space, this should become integral before x tan square of minus determinant t g mu rho g mu sigma f rho sigma.
So when if mu nu is defined as d mu a mu.
Yeah, but what is called f mu nu? F mu nu this is the same as d mu a nu minus d mu a nu. Right? Because the gamma term drops out because I have told because of the symmetry of gamma. Okay? This will involve a gamma rho mu nu, this will involve a gamma rho nu mu, and those two are terms cancel. So this is the same as this. Okay? So you can use either this or this depending on your convenience. And it turns out that if you want to show, for example, that the variation of this gives the correct Maxwell's equation, then it is useful to use this form. Okay. So let's see how that works. So suppose S electromagnetic is given by this, okay. Then I will write delta S electromagnetic. So yeah, we can vary this or this, okay, but that's just a factor of 2. So 2 C integral d4x square root of minus determinant t g mu rho g mu sigma d mu a mu minus d mu a mu and f rho sigma. Sorry, delta. But now you can make use of the fact that this combination g mu rho g mu sigma f rho sigma is antisymmetric in mu nu. Okay, so you can drop one of these terms and multiply this by a further factor of 2. So you could, for example, drop this and multiply this by another factor of 2. Is this clear? Now I can write this as delta ICM 4C integral so you want to integrate by parts. So what we will do is we will write this as d mu of G mu rho G mu sigma delta mu mu sigma minus delta mu minus d mu G mu sigma. Okay, because d mu distributes in the same way as the ordinary derivative. So d mu acting on all of this. There is a term which involves d mu delta nu, which is already here, and then there is a term where d mu acts on the rest of the stuff which I have subtracted out. Now this term over here actually is a total derivative. And the way in which to see this is that you think of this, see the whole thing that appears here is a vector, right? This is a vector field, so call this d j mu. And at some point we have derived an equation of this form. D mu j mu is 1 over square root of minus determinant G del mu of square root of minus determinant G times J mu. Okay, this is the general result that we have derived from using the definition of D mu. So if you use this, we see that this minus determinant G cancels this, and then there is a d4x which I forgot to write. d4x. So this becomes now a genuinely total derivative, okay, and it's a sum of boundary terms. And the boundary terms vanish because j mu, which is this object over here, vanishes because delta n is 0 at the boundary. Okay, so this term then can be ignored. We are only left with the second term. And now if we demand that this should vanish for arbitrary delta nu, we see that we should have d mu of this equal to 0. So delta ACM equal to 0 for arbitrary delta mu implies d mu of this quantity G rho sigma 0, which is the same as d mu if mu mu. Okay, that's Maxwell's equation in that space. So this means that to this action, if you want to couple electromagnetic field also to gravity, we should add to this plus C integral d4x work of minus determinant G mu rho G mu sigma F mu F rho sigma. Is this clear? But now you see that once you have added this term in the action, the Einstein's equation has got new terms. Because now when you vary with respect to delta G, with respect to G, okay, then this gave the R mu nu minus half R G mu nu term. This gave the energy moment of tensor due to matter. Okay? But this one will give a new term. And you can guess what it will give. This will give the energy moment of tensor due to electromagnetic field. Okay? But that of course depends on the normalization.
Minus 1/4.
Right? Yeah, so what you can show is that only precisely for C equal to minus 1/4, the equations of motion that we will get by varying with respect to G will be the correctly normalized Einstein's equation. So this I leave as an exercise. So exercise for C equal to minus 1/4, we get correctly normalized. Electromagnetic mu behind Einstein's equation. Okay, so I'll put this as minus 1. Now this is the correct answer, provided the matter that you are using is uncharged. Okay? If the matter, okay, this particle, okay, so you have, this is the gravity part, this is electromagnetic field, and this is just a particle moving in this background. So as long as the particle doesn't carry any charge, okay, we have got all the equations of motion correctly, right? Because the equation of motion for the particle is the geodesic equation, equation of motion for the this field is the Maxwell equation in the absence of source, and the equation of motion for gravity is the correct equation with the correct energy momentum transfer. But now suppose that the matter is charged, okay, suppose it carries a charge Q under the electromagnetic field. Then two things are wrong. Okay. First of all, the equations of motion for the particle in this case is no longer geodesic equation. Right? There is a force term on the right hand side, right? The Lorentz force term, which you had written down. Right? If you recall that the equation of motion for a charged matter, okay, has of course the usual geodesic term on the left hand side, but there is a force, Lorentz force term on the right hand side. So that's something that is wrong. Okay, that's not there. If you vary with respect to capital X, you still get only the free particle equation, or namely the motion in gravitational field, but no electromagnetic field. The second thing that is wrong here is in the absence of a charged particle, the Maxwell's equation should have a source term. This is no longer the correct Maxwell's equation. Okay? There should be J mu on the right hand side. So the particle carries charge. Right? Okay, so that is also missing. So this suggests that we have to add a new term to the action, which describes the coupling of electromagnetic field to the particle. And I'll leave as an exercise to check that the following coupling works. If the particle carries charge Q, then delta U of x. Right, so that you can now take the integral d4 x delta mu x outside and it's set to 0, whatever multiplies it in the variation. So using that, we will get some extra term on the right hand side, and that will turn out to be precisely the current, the expression for the current that we had written down earlier in terms of the capital X. Any questions? Okay, so this you should try to check.
Is the relation of mu and very X or means capital X or E?
Yeah, so this is the place where you are varying mu.
In
Right? For varying capital X, of course, you don't have to do that. Right? For varying capital X, you can do it at this stage itself.
mu X plus del.
Exactly. Mu capital X plus delta of capital X, right? And then expand it out. Okay, because the variation of capital X is always as an integral over d. Right? It's only when that you are trying to calculate the correction from Maxwell's equation, right? In this term, it's delta mu of x integrated over the 4-dimensional space time, right? So you have to express this one also in that form. Right? Only then you can collect the coefficient of delta mu of x and set it to 0. So for example, in the Maxwell's equation now, we will have this whole thing. Integral du times delta 4 of small x minus capital X. Right? And that is the current, right? The current, if you recall, had such a delta function with a covariant form, right? It basically reflects the fact that the source for that the charge particle produces is localized in space time. Right? It's there only when the particle is located. Right? It's not spread everywhere in space time. So using this kind of principle, you can also couple any other field to gravity. Okay, at least to most of the other fields that you know of. And the general rule seems to be simple. Rules for coupling field theory to gravity. So basically we replace integral d4x by integral d4x times square root of minus determinant g. Okay? So that the integration measure is invariant. Okay, so when you change x to x prime, it becomes a Jacobian factor, but that's precisely cancelled by the transformation of g. Then you have to replace the ordinary derivative by covariant derivative. And then you also have to replace eta mu nu factors by g mu.
So they are again that last term, is it acting like a again correction?
Which last term?
That q mu dx.
Yes.
Is it working like another connection or something?
Okay, this is basically the integral a dot dx term, right? Even if in the suppose you didn't have gravity, right? But you just have a particle moving in the electromagnetic field, and you want to write down an action that couples the particle to the electromagnetic field, then you will basically write the same action. So this part really doesn't depend on a metric, right? Which is important because if this depended on a metric, then the variation with respect to the metric would give you a new term in the energy moment potential, right? Which you don't want because you already have got the correct terms from these. So this is an additional term to the action, right? Which was there, which would have been there even in the absence of gravity.
Also, the coupling of the particle to the electromagnetic field shouldn't affect the metric.
Yes, exactly. So the point is here, well, it could in principle, right? It could in principle, there could have been a g mu nu somewhere, right? But these indices are contracted in such a way that the natural index of a mu is downstairs because these are the elementary fields. X mu has its index up, so you don't need a metric to make this contraction. Okay? This is not always that way. Sometimes, if you add a new interaction, okay, that new interaction could give rise to new term in the energy momentum tensor because the new interaction may require a metric to write down.
Yes, but the coupling to the electromagnetic field we have already done in the.
Exactly. So the point is that these already give the correct coupling, energy momentum tensor. Right? So then we know that we shouldn't have. If we had gotten some additional term, we would have to worry, right? Because those terms are not there in the field equations that we had written down. Okay, because we had independently derived the equation of motion for the energy momentum tensor for the matter and the electromagnetic field, and we didn't get any such term. But we could have got, right? I mean, it could have been that the interactions are such that due to interaction you produce new term in the energy momentum tensor, right? Which basically means the interaction would have involved the metric. Okay, it's just that this particular interaction, that of a charged particle with electromagnetic field, does not require the metric, and hence it doesn't give additional contribution to the energy momentum tensor.
Gravity will not differentiate between a charged particle and uncharged particle.
Yes, the gravity, exactly. So the gravity doesn't distinguish between a charged particle and uncharged particle. But nevertheless, if there is an interaction energy, right, then gravity knows about that. Right? For example, the hydrogen, gravitational field of the hydrogen atom is not the same as that of a proton plus that of an electron. Right? Because the binding energy of the electron to the proton, right, that also gravitates. Right? So in this sense, it's not that the gravity is insensitive to interaction, right? But this particular kind of interaction is something that gravity doesn't see.
So you can also see that massless particle with charge can also create gravity.
Yes, massless particle with charge can also create gravity. Of course, here if you set mass equal to 0, you don't see this. Right? So for photon, you have to write the action in a slightly different way, right? Because then you cannot use this parameter u has to be chosen appropriately. Yeah, but indeed, once you normalize it correctly, the photons can contribute to the energy momentum tensor.
Sir, in this interaction term also, if we I write a mu and dx nu lower,
Yes,
then I have to write some g there.
that's right. Yes,
When g is coming into the interaction.
yes. So if you take x lower nu as your independent variable,
Yes, sir.
right, then in terms of that, it looks like there will be a contribution to energy momentum tensor. But then this term will also change, right? Because if you use x lower nu, right, g will appear in a different way. So effectively, the physical source will not change, right? But the actual term that you write could differ.
Okay, we are using a lower index
Yes,
and x upper.
x upper index, exactly. Because those are natural indices that appears in the. I mean, the point is, those are natural in many ways. For example, a lower mu, right? Under Gauge transformation, a lower mu transforms naturally, right? A upper mu, you have to introduce a metric in the Gauge transformation now.
And that's why this third term is contributing to gravitational energy and not the fourth one.
Exactly, that's right.
And on depending our notation, which term is contributing, that depend on our notation.
Yes, that could depend on your notation. What you take as independent
But the
variable.
final also will be independent.
Yeah. So the physics, of course, will be independent. Okay. And this has to do with the fact that if you have a function of multiple variables, right? And suppose you are trying to extremize, okay, you can make a redefinition of variables, right? Instead of using x, y, you could use x plus y and x minus y. Okay. But once you have extremized with respect to all the variables, right, then it doesn't matter how you have chosen your variables, it's the extremum are the same. Right? If you decide to extremize only with respect to part of the variables, then of course you cannot compare. Right? So similarly here, I mean, once you use the equation of motion for the metric and x mu, right, and electromagnetic field, okay, then it will not matter how you have chosen your variables. Right? The collection of all these equations, okay, you can transform one to the other, okay, by simple linear combinations. Okay, now this procedure is what is called minimal coupling. But this need not be the only possible kind of terms you can add to the action. Okay. There can be non-minimal terms in that you add to the action. Okay, here I will give an example. So non-minimal terms. Say you have integral d4 x square root of minus determinant g r mu nu rho sigma F mu nu F rho sigma. Okay. So this of course you have to do, okay, in the original action, but after you have done all that, you could still add a new term to the action which is some coefficient alpha times this. And this is allowed because this is perfectly general coordinate invariant term. And in flat space, this term will vanish because r mu rho sigma is 0. So there is a contradiction with what you already know in flat space. Okay? Because in flat space you know the Maxwell action is the correct action.
And this term will violate the principle of equivalence.
Yes, so this term will violate the principle of equivalence, right? So the minimal coupling is what you normally refer to as the principle of equivalence. This is something that will violate the principle of equivalence, but nevertheless, in physics there is no reason why first terms cannot be present. Okay? The only reason that we don't normally worry about these terms is because these coefficients are typically very small, as we had discussed earlier. Okay? Just from dimensional analysis, this corresponding coefficient will be so small that in day-to-day physics they are effectively negligible.
This should change also the Einstein equation?
Yes, this will in general change Einstein's equation also, because when you vary with respect to metric, you will get contribution from this variation as well as this one. So it will change both Maxwell's equation and Einstein's equation.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, if we will have two charged particles,
Yes.
then we can change that capital X to X1 and Q to Q1, N to N1. Similarly, M2, Q to X2.
Exactly.
And similarly, we have to give another interaction term between them.
Yeah, so you basically can, if you have multiple charged particles, all you have to do is that you write sum over n and put n here. And similarly here, sum over n, Qn, this is xn.
Now we will see the equation for the G mean.
Yes.
Then there should be some contribution from the Coulomb force. That
No. From this still doesn't depend on the metric.
Coulomb force, I think.
There is sum over n.
Will be within A mu.
Right? We are talking about, see of course the Coulomb force, right? That energy contribution, that energy density, you see from here. Because electromagnetic field certainly contributes to gravitational energy moment potential, right? And when you have two charged particles, right? Even though this term doesn't depend on the metric, okay, what will happen is two charged particles will produce electromagnetic field, right? When you solve the electromagnetic field equations, and that gravitates, that acts as a source of gravity, right? So that's the way we'll see the effect of Coulomb interaction on the metric.
in
Right.
case of hydrogen atom, although
Yes.
those are two particles, this will be the same one or there will be something different?
No, you can you use this for the hydrogen atom, right? So one can be proton, one can be electron, right? And the interaction energy, the fact that the interaction energy gravitates, right? That comes from this term. Because this tells us that the electromagnetic field acts as a source of gravity, right? And now if you have an electron-proton system, there is electromagnetic field, right? That electron-proton system produces, okay? And that acts as a source of gravity. Is this okay? Okay, in fact, it's not just the electromagnetic field energy, but also the, for example, the kinetic energy of the electron and proton. Okay? Those will also contribute. Okay? Those will come from here. So the binding energy gets contribution both from the kinetic energy term as well as from the electromagnetic field energy. So all of those will add and gravitate.
Whole system can be described by this action.
Yeah, whole system. So these are of course classical, right? But to the extent that you can describe the hydrogen atom as a classical system, right? It can be described by this action. Now, this procedure, okay, although it's quite straightforward, unfortunately it doesn't always work. Okay? And it doesn't work when there are spinor fields, right? Dirac fields. So I'll now try to describe how you go about solving that problem, and this requires developing a new formalism. But first let me illustrate where the problem is. So this procedure,
Minimal coupling.
pardon?
This procedure meaning the minimal coupling procedure.
Yeah, this procedure of replacing the ordinary derivative by covariant derivative as we have discussed.
This will not work for that.
This will not work for Dirac. Okay. Okay, so let me illustrate why it doesn't work. What are the difficulties? So let me begin by writing on the flat space action. So in flat space, we can write an action for the Dirac field, which is this psi of course carries an index, the spinor index, which I have suppressed. Okay, these M has to be thought of as an M identity matrix, and these gamma mu's are matrices with spinor index. So let us see what kind of difficulty we encounter. So the first step is okay. Right? First step is integral d4x is going to integral d4x times square root of minus g, determinant g, that of course you can always do. This replacement, replacing ordinary derivative by covariant derivative, that runs into problem here.
This gamma mu will change.
Yeah. So first of all, forget about gamma mu. First, let's look at this partial derivative, del x. You are supposed to replace this by covariant derivative. But covariant derivative is not something unique. It depends on which field it's acting on. Right? For example, for scalars, okay, if it acts on a scalar, then ordinary derivative is the same as covariant derivative. Del mu phi and d mu phi are the same. Okay? If it's acting on a vector, okay, covariant vector, then it has a very specific structure. So del mu, d mu nu, for example, we write it on that side. D mu nu is rho mu nu minus a rho. Right? If it has a rank 2 tensor, then there will be two terms like this. So what you mean by covariant derivative is not something unique. Okay, it depends on what field it acts on. Now here, the field that it's acting on, psi, is not an ordinary tensor on which we have defined our covariant derivatives. Okay? We have defined our covariant derivatives on ordinary tensors which has multiple vector-like index. Okay? A mu1, mu2 up to mu n, we know how to define it. A with certain number of upper index, certain number of lower index, we know how to define it. Psi, however, carries a spinor index, okay, which is not the usual vector index, okay, and we have not said what you mean by covariant derivative on such a field. Is this point clear? Now we can take a naive approach, which is that because psi is a spinor, okay, which seems to be a new kind of index, we can treat it as a scalar. Suppose you try to, be brave and treat just psi as a scalar, okay, because it's a spinor. We have not defined covariant derivatives on such indices. Suppose you just think of psi as a scalar and proceed and see what happens. So if we treat psi as a scalar, if we think of psi as a scalar, then you know that del mu psi transforms as covariant vector. okay, which you can also say is 0, 1, rank 0, 1 tensor. So if we want the action to be invariant, then gamma mu should transform as a rank 1, 0 tensor, right, or a contravariant vector. Okay, then this combination will be invariant, will be like a scalar. But gamma mu is not a field. Right? Gamma mu is a matrix. Okay, it doesn't make sense to say that gamma mu transforms. Okay, a matrix is a matrix given to us once and for all, right? The Dirac matrices you are given and then you have to work with it. So it makes no sense to say that the gamma mu transforms. Okay, gamma mu's are the usual gamma mu's that you are familiar with. So you see that just thinking of psi as a scalar doesn't work.
So, just
Yes.
gamma mu's we actually solved as a consequence of del u del upper mu of psi, means p mu equals to m square.
That's right.
And that we solved. So gamma mu's follow the and the preferred algebra. So that was the.
That's true. But now the point is when you are trying to write down the equation, right? What will you take for gamma mu? Suppose somebody.
It will be some g mu times p mu equals to.
But gamma mu doesn't depend on p, right? See, gamma mu are just fixed matrices. Suppose you have to, p comes when you try to solve it, right? First you have to give the Dirac equation, right? Then comes the question of solution. Right? When you write the Dirac equation, psi is a 4-component scalar, right? And gamma mu's are given as some matrices, right? Okay, and we cannot say that the gamma mu's change from one coordinate system to another coordinate system, right? Then the gamma mu's are not fixed matrices. Okay? Gamma mu's have to be given once and for all to write down the equations, and then you have to make sure that whatever be the gamma mu's which have been given, okay, with those gamma mu's, the equations, the action is invariant when you make a change of frame. Right? And that basically means that this cannot be the story, right? That if gamma mu's are fixed matrices, right, then clearly we cannot have psi transform as a scalar. Okay, because then there is a contradiction, del mu psi transform as a vector and then it is not a scalar. So this is the problem that we face when we try to generalize it to Dirac equation, when you try to make Dirac action covariant. Okay, I have written it here in terms of the action, but the same difficulty arises when you try to work with equations of motion. Okay. That if you try to make the Dirac equation covariant, you run into exactly the same problem, right? So it's not a problem that you are facing just because you are demanding an action principle. Now, as I said, there is a solution to this, okay, but this solution will require developing a whole new formalism, okay, which I will try to do. Okay, and we will not probably get to Dirac equation today, but at least we can try to begin by writing down the formalism. We need new formalism, and this is sometimes called tetrad or pure line. Okay, and I'll describe what this is.
So what is the last word?
Pure line.
Here.
VIVR, yeah, VIN.
IN.
So the idea is that instead of working with the metric, okay, we have to work with the square root of the metric. Okay. And this essentially is motivated by the fact that the Dirac equation in some sense is the square root of the time-bound equation. Okay. Or spinors are in some sense the square root of vectors. Okay. if you think non-relativistically, spinors carry spin half,
Hmm.
right? Vectors carry spin 1.
Hmm.
Okay, so in some sense, these two spinors make a vector.
Yeah.
Okay. So because of this, okay, we have to introduce a notion in which we work with the square root of the metric. Okay, and we work with those variables. Now, of course, metric is a matrix, right? So its square root is not well defined. Okay? It has many square roots. Okay? But we have to work with all those square roots simultaneously. So let me explain what this means. So G mu nu is a symmetric matrix, right? And so this means that it can be diagonalized by an orthogonal transformation. So this means that G should be writable as S G diagonal S transpose. So G diagonal has the structure minus lambda 0, lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda 3, and S transpose S is identity.
The components of S's will be different for different points.
Yes, exactly.
So,
So I can write it as S of x, and the eigenvalues will of course also be different for different points. So this is dependent on the point. The only thing I want to use is the fact that G, because it's Lorentzian signature, it has one negative eigenvalue and three positive eigenvalues. And I can always choose my orthogonal transformation matrix such that the negative eigenvalue is the first one and the rest are positive. Okay, so in this notation, lambda 0, lambda 1, lambda 2 and lambda 3 are all positive. So if we now define the matrix E, which is S of x times square root of lambda 0
all are positive.
pardon?
All are positive.
Yes, because lambda 0, lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda 3 are positive. I have explicitly put a minus sign. Okay. And now I am taking S of x times just the square root. Okay. So these are all well defined matrices.
Should be total lambda 0 square will that minus sign will not.
No.
No, it's my minus sign will not come. So let's say, let me write this. So then G can be written as E transpose E times eta times E transpose. Eta is the usual eta, minus 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay, so the minus sign is not coming from E but from eta. Is that clear? So the point is E, you write it S times this. So when you multiply this times eta times this itself, you get back the diagonal matrix. And then you have S on the left hand side, S transpose on the right hand side. Okay, and you get back this one. So in component notation, let me write the component notation now. G mu nu of x, which is E mu A of x, eta A B, G mu B of x. So here this one is the row index, this is the column index. Okay, that's why I have written this to the left and that to the right. Let's say, so this is E mu A eta AB, right? So that's the correct product, E times eta. Here you see that the column index of this is being contracted to the column index of this. Right? So that means this matrix product is actually with E transpose. Okay? If you take the transpose of E, then the column index becomes the row index and then it's the correct matrix contraction. Okay? Column index of eta gets contracted to the row index of E transpose. So this product here, okay, when write components, okay, so G is E eta E transpose. Okay? The components of G are mu nu. Okay? This component notation you get this structure. Is this clear? So this variable E mu A of x, okay, this is what is called the tetrad on the field line.
So this matrix is called tetrad.
Yes. And you see that this has all the information that the metric has. Because if we know this, we can calculate the metric. Right? So which means that this has the complete information as the metric. But this in fact has more information than the metric. Why does it have more information? It has more information because if you look at the definition of E, okay, S times that matrix, E has no symmetry property. Okay? There is no reason why E mu has to be symmetric. So E has 16 independent components, 4 times 4. 16 independent components. G mu nu on the other hand is symmetric, so this has 10 independent components.
So more than one tetrad can give a
More than one?
tetrad
Yes.
can give a single matrix.
Exactly, that's what it will look like. Right? That because there is a 16 independent components and this is only 10, right? It must be that there is a 6 parameter family of E's which give the same metric.
Yes, yes.
Okay? But now we will try to characterize that 6 parameter family.
This has 16 independent components due to that Sx multiplied with the diagonal matrix.
Due to?
Means E has 16 independent components because S is also multiplied with the diagonal matrix.
Yes, exactly.
So physically, what Sx means, what information Sx contains.
So Sx essentially contains the information that diagonalizes the matrix. Right? And then the lambdas contain information about the diagonal values. Right? So Sx tells us how to diagonalize it, and lambdas contain information about diagonal values of the matrix. So what we will do now is to first characterize this ambiguity. Okay, the fact that E has more information than the metric. Right? Where is that more extra information going? So suppose lambda AB is a Lorentz transformation matrix. namely lambda eta lambda transpose is equal to eta. In component notation, lambda AB eta BC lambda BC. The last one is lambda transpose, so the column index and column index have to go together. Is eta AB. Okay, this is the matrix. This is what Lorentz transform of the matrix satisfies. Now it follows from this that E mu A and E mu A times lambda A E mu C lambda CA of X describes same E mu. Okay, so E tilde mu A. So E tilde mu A eta AB E tilde mu B. So E tilde mu A is E mu C lambda CB CA, right? Eta AB and then E tilde mu B, so that's E mu D lambda dB. But if you take consider this combination. Lambda CA eta AB lambda dB. This using this
CD.
is just eta CD. So this gives you E mu C eta CD E mu D, which is precisely G mu. Is this clear? So this we see from here is that we have identified the source of this ambiguity. Okay. That yes, that the fact that the two different E's give the same metric is simply related to the fact that if you take this E mu A and make a Lorentz transformation on this index A, okay, standard Lorentz transformation, okay, by lambda. That's what this E tilde does, right? E mu C lambda CA of X. If you make a Lorentz transformation on this index A, it doesn't change the metric. So E mu A and E mu C lambda CA, they have exactly the same metric.
Lambda will also depend.
Lambda you could make dependent on X, right? Because nothing that you have done here goes wrong
Local Lorentz.
if lambda depends on X. So this lambda, right, can vary from X to point to point.
Local Lorentz transform.
Yeah, so the point is here you are not taking any derivative. Right? If there is a derivative involved, then you have to worry that this derivative could act on this and spoil. Right? Here you are simply asking the fact that what are the different emus which give the same metric, because emus have more degrees of freedom than a metric. Okay? Emus are characterized by 16 parameters, metric is characterized by 10 parameters. Right? So emu has 16 functions, metric has 10 functions. Right? So what are these extra 6 functions? Okay? That doesn't change the metric. And this lambda contains those 6 functions. Right? Why 6? Because the Lorentz transformation is characterized by 6 independent parameters. Right? The 3 boosts and 3 rotations. That is familiar to everybody. Right? Lorentz transformation is characterized by 6 parameters. Okay? And those are the 6. So now those 6 parameters each can be function of x. Right? Because lambda in general is a function of x. So you have 6 functions of x, okay, hidden inside this lambda, and those 6 functions change E but don't change the metric. So that is the ambiguity, and this is what is called the local Lorentz transformation. Okay. So this means that the metric, if you now take, for example, the Einstein-Hilbert action and write in terms of E, which you can always do, right? Because it was written in terms of a metric. Metric, wherever you have a metric, you substitute this combination. You get a function of E. So that action now not only has general coordinate invariance, but also has local Lorentz symmetry. Right? Because if you make this transformation on E, the metric doesn't change at all. And the Einstein-Hilbert action is written in terms of a metric. Right? So the metric doesn't change at all, the action doesn't change clearly. So this is a new symmetry of the action when you write in terms of E. Okay. General coordinate invariance of course is very much there. Okay. But on top of that, the action written in terms of E now has this additional symmetry where you can replace E mu by this, okay, and the action remains unchanged. Or if you are more used to using equation of motion, you said the equations of motion remain unchanged when you make this replacement. Is this point clear?
When we studied that G mu making it diagonal, there was a independence of A is that reflects.
Yes, exactly. That's basically what is showing up here. So let me emphasize again that this is something that is a new kind of symmetry. It's not very useful in the sense that this is of course just describing redundancy. Right? In terms of metric, this redundancy was not there. Metric had the correct number of, not correct number of degrees of freedom. Of course, metric also had general coordinate invariance. You have to gauge fix. Okay. Now, when you write the action in terms of the Feuerbach or the tetrad, okay, we not only have general coordinate invariance, okay, but also this additional local Lorentz transformation, which you have to gauge fix. Okay. And that gauge fixing will remove the 6 extra degrees of freedom that you have in E, okay, and get back to the number of degrees of freedom that you have in the metric. And then you have to gauge fix general coordinate transformation, okay, as we had done earlier.
So in Einstein-Hilbert action, there is also derivatives are involved.
Yes.
So that's where the problem arises.
No, that will not cause problem because the derivatives are acting on G mu, right? Okay. But before you even act a derivative, G mu when you write in terms of E mu, right? That combination, see, it never acts separately on each individual E mu, right? Because the derivative acts on G mu.
Yes.
Okay? And G mu itself is invariant. Right? So that means del mu G mu is also be invariant. You see, normally the problem appears that you have to do covariantization is that G mu suppose it gets multiplied by some function f x. Now when you act derivative with derivative, okay, the derivative can act on the function of x that multiplies G mu. Right? And that gives extra terms which you have to remove. Okay. Here G mu doesn't transform at all.
Yeah.
Right?
It's invariant.
It's invariant. Right? So derivative of G mu will also be invariant. Is this clear?
So what is this called? Local Lorentz?
Yes, this is called, this transformation is called local Lorentz transformation. So the strategy is to use E mu A of x as independent variables instead of G mu of x, and this immediately implies that we have additional symmetry in local Lorentz transformation.
It's only that for this E, if you write the equations in terms of mu, this symmetry is visible. This symmetry is always present for the mu.
Well, this symmetry, I mean, it doesn't make sense to say that this is present for G mu nu because if all fields are neutral. Right? On G mu nu, this symmetry doesn't act. So G mu nu goes to G mu nu under this symmetry. Right? So if G mu nu's are the variables, then having a symmetry which doesn't act to the fields at all is no use, right? So this is relevant only if E mu is are used, right? Because then E mu are actually transformed, right? And the action is invariant under this transformation.
So this is coordinate transformation or gauge transformation? This is coordinate transformation.
No, this is not coordinate transformation, right? This is a transformation on, it doesn't change the coordinates.
But it is not even gauge transformation.
It's gauge transformation in the sense that the transformation parameter depends on coordinates, right? So in this sense, it's gauge transformation, and you are identifying field configurations under this transformation, right? E mu a and E mu a multiplied by lambda actually describe same field configuration. Just like in ordinary Maxwell electromagnetism, E mu and E mu plus del mu lambda describe the same field configuration, right? Physical field configuration. They give the same electromagnetic fields. Okay? The same is true here. E mu a is not physical. Okay? The metric is more physical than E mu a, even though metric itself can be changed under general coordinate transformation, but at least metric is more physical than E mu a. E mu a has some additional degrees of freedom, just like the A mu in electromagnetism had this additional degree of freedom. Okay? And you represent that additional degree of freedom by saying that it's a gauge degree of freedom. Okay? On E mu a, the action of this gauge transformation is E mu a going to E mu a times lambda AB. So this local Lorentz symmetry acts as E mu a of x equal to E mu a, E mu b of x times lambda b a x. Okay, lambda satisfies lambda is a lambda transpose. Okay. Now, because we have decided that we are going to use E mu a as our independent variables, we have to now also determine how the other symmetries act on E mu a. In particular, general coordinate transformation. Right? We had seen earlier that general coordinate transformation acts in a certain way on the metric. But now we are saying that we are not going to use metric as our independent degree of freedom, we are going to use E mu a as our variable. So we need to know how the general coordinate transformation acts on E mu a. Okay? So for this, it's best to start by writing down the general coordinate transformation on G mu. Okay? So we know that G mu nu goes to G prime mu nu of x prime, which is del prime mu x rho del prime mu x sigma 0 sigma of x. Now 0 sigma of x is E rho A eta AB E sigma B. Okay. This one, by definition, should be E prime mu A of x prime eta AB E prime mu B of x prime. Okay, that because G and eta E are related always by this relation. Okay, that's the postulate that E is defined as the square root of G, whether it's in the transformed frame or the prime or the untransformed frame is the same. Okay, E is always the square root of G. That means G and E satisfies a relation of this kind both in the prime variable and also in the unprime variable. So from this we learn that this should be equal to del prime mu x rho del prime mu x sigma E rho A eta AB E sigma B. And now we can compare the two sides to figure out what E prime should be in terms of E. So this suggests that E prime mu A x prime should be del prime mu x rho E rho A of x. Okay, namely this part. And then E prime mu B is del prime mu x sigma E sigma B. These equations are of course the same equation, okay, with just the index change. Okay, otherwise it would not make sense to write this. Just changing mu to nu and a to b gives you this.
Which is a vector. Okay.
Yeah, so this means that E prime mu A transform as a vector. Now I should emphasize that this is of course not unique, because you always have the freedom of multiplying this by local Lorentz transformation, because you are comparing what you know is how the metric transforms, right? We also know that knowing the metric you cannot reconstruct the E uniquely, right? There is always the freedom of local Lorentz transformation. So when you say that the general coordinate transformation acts this way, it is a convenient choice. It is possible to choose the general coordinate transformation to act this way. You always have a choice of multiplying this by local Lorentz transformation, and that will not change the form of the metric, transformation of the metric. But we will choose this as the transformation law E under general coordinate transformation. Okay. It's a question of what are the independent symmetries, right? The independent symmetries written in terms of E are general coordinate transformation, which is this, and local Lorentz transformation. Okay. And the point is that you can always choose to declare that a combination of general coordinate transformation as we have written and local Lorentz transformation is our general coordinate transformation. Nobody can prevent you from doing that, because on the metric it acts exactly as general coordinate transformation. Lorentz transformation. As far as the metric is concerned, it's as good as just an ordinary general coordinate transformation. Okay. So for this reason, we cannot start from the transformation of the metric and determine uniquely how it should act on E. Okay, because you always have a freedom of multiplying by local Lorentz transformation from the right. Okay, but given this, here we see that E mu A transforms as a covariant vector.
So we see that the one index A which does not change.
Yeah, so the index A transforms on a local Lorentz transformation, but not on a general coordinate transformation. So E mu A transforms as a covariant vector. Is this okay? So similarly, okay, let me now introduce a new definition. The definition: E is the matrix inverse of small e. It's not an independent degree of freedom, of course, because knowing small e, you know capital A. But we denote E with the index as E A mu, and it satisfies the equation that E A mu E mu B is eta A B, sorry, delta A B, what's delta A B, and E E mu A E A B is delta mu. Yeah, because at this, once you have this, the second equation follows, because left and right inverse of a matrix is the same. Okay, so this says that capital A is the left inverse of small e, and this says the capital A is the right inverse of small e. So, exercise, just take forward. First, show that E A mu transforms as contravariant vector. Vector under general coordinate transformation. And 2 is to show that E A mu goes to E B mu lambda B A under local Lorentz transformation. Where lambda B A, lambda upper B lower A, is this basically eta B C, eta A D, lambda C Okay, earlier we had introduced lambda c. So now we have the first index up, second index down, but those who raising and lowering, that's value beta. Is this clear? Now, using these new variables, we can, of course, our main goal will be to understand how to write Dirac equation, okay, or the Dirac Lagrangian. But even ordinary fields, the coupling of ordinary fields to gravity can be enormously simplified if we use the Fiersteins. Well, I mean, you may not think of this as an enormous simplification, okay, because it doesn't buy you that much, okay, except that the organization becomes simpler. Okay. But at least it can be put on the same footing as Dirac field using Fiersteins. Okay, so let me describe that, and then next time we'll continue. So let's suppose that we have a field A, ordinary Maxwell field. A mu and we have E mu A. Okay, this is the Fierstein. So these are our independent variables. And from E mu A, we also have E d mu. Okay, because this is derived from here. Now, instead of taking these as our independent variables, I always have a choice of taking the following as independent variables. A hat A as A mu times E A d A mu and E mu. Is this clear? Right, I just chose a different combination because after all this is determined in terms of small a. So if we know A hat A, we know A mu and vice versa. Okay, that's a multiplication by the small u or capital A. But A hat A has a feature that this is a scalar under general coordinate transformation. Right, because its mu index is contracted. Right? This was a covariant vector, this is a contravariant vector, we have contracted. So A hat A is scalar under general coordinate transformation. But of course there is some price to pay, that this now transforms under local Lorentz transformation. Right? Because this transforms on a local Lorentz transformation. Okay, A mu earlier didn't transform on a local Lorentz transformation, but A hat A will. So it transforms by some Lorentz transformation matrix as a covariant vector. But this makes it look similar to what happens for the Dirac field. Okay. Because the Dirac field psi, right, under general coordinate transformations, we have no idea what it's doing. But at least you have some idea of what it does on a Lorentz transformation, right? You know how the Lorentz generators act on the field side. So if we can figure out how to formulate the action in terms of these A hat variables, right, which are like scalars under general coordinate transformation, but which are vectors under local Lorentz transformation, then you have a hope of generalizing that to the case of Dirac fields. Okay? Because then you can declare the Dirac fields as scalar under local Lorentz and under general coordinate transformation, but as some kind of spinors under local Lorentz transformation.
And do you know how spinors transform on the local?
Yeah, because spinors, we know, at least you have some idea how Lorentz transformation acts on the spinors. Right? So you can use that knowledge to figure out how to write down the action for the Dirac field. Okay, it's still a long way to go, okay, but at least this is some progress. Okay. And just to generalize this, okay, it's clear from this that it's kind of done for any tensor. So if we have some general tensors, say P mu1 to mu n, mu1 to mu m, we can trade it in for another tensor P hat, a1 to an, b1 to bn, as follows. We just take E mu1 a1 up to E mu n, sorry, this is mu n n, and then E E1 mu1 to E en times P E1 So this object transformed as a mixed tensor on a general coordinate transformation. This object is a scalar under general coordinate transformation. But on a Lorentz transformation, it transforms in some representation of the Lorentz group. And so the idea is that if you can figure out how to write down covariant derivatives acting on a general representation of the Lorentz group, then we can generalize it to define covariant derivative on the Dirac field. Okay. And because we already know how covariant derivative acts on a mu, okay, from this we can try to figure out how it should act on this. Okay, and that will give us a clue as to how to define covariant derivatives on a general representation of the Lorentz group. Okay, and this is what we will try to study during the next few lectures.
Right, so in this representation, the gamma mu's will transform in the inverse Lorentz.
So the gamma mu's, as we will see, will not transform, right? But gamma mu's you have to replace. Okay, gamma mu's will transform, but the gamma mu's will, instead of using gamma mu's, we will write this as E a mu gamma a. Okay, gamma a's will be the fixed matrices. Okay, the way we will proceed is we will think of the gamma a's as fixed matrices. Okay. E a mu's, of course, transform the vectors. Yeah, this is the way we will solve the problem that gamma mu's as metric couldn't have transformed. Right? But we will generalize it to chord space by saying that gamma mu, instead of wherever there is gamma mu, you replace it by this. Okay. When you go to the flat space limit, this is identity matrix, you get back to gamma m, the standard gamma matrix. But in chord space in general, gamma mu will be defined in this fashion.
So here the gamma mu is a vector or gamma is a fixed matrix?
Gamma is a fixed matrix, exactly.
And gamma
So-
mu is a vector.
Well, gamma mu will transform as a vector by definition, right?
Yeah.
Because gamma is a fixed matrix, right? So this will transform as a vector.
So here,
Okay, so under general, so once you write it in this form, right, then the invariance on a general coordinate transformation is manifest, right?
yes.
Because we declare the size are scalars on a general coordinate transformation.
We write everything in terms of Lorentz.
Yeah. So now the only subtlety will be to make sure that the action is invariant on a local Lorentz transformation. Right? The general coordinate transformation will be trivial because size will declare as scalars on a general coordinate transformation, just like all these A's are scalars. Okay. So what will happen is that psi bar gamma del mu psi will be a vector under general coordinate transformation because of the derivative del mu. Okay. Derivative of a scalar field is a vector. E mu a, E mu is a vector under general coordinate transformation. but contravariant vector. So the contraction will give a scalar automatically. So this way will ensure that the action is invariant on a general coordinate transformation. But ensuring Lorentz invariance, local Lorentz invariance is going to be more complicated.
So you said gamma mu was scalar under in general coordinate transformation.
Yes, so before we knew about the e's, right? We had no choice but to declare the gamma mu's as scalars because gamma mu's are just fixed matrices, right?
Yes, sir.
But once you have introduced the e's, right, we have a choice of declaring not gamma mu's as fixed matrices, but gamma a's as fixed matrices.
But indirectly we are defining then, sir, gamma mu as covariant tensors.
Yes, that's right. So we make gamma mu covariant tensor with the help of the sphere binds. Without the sphere binds, there is no way you could have made gamma mu's into tensors. Because what we want is that in the flat space limit, it should reduce to the matrices that you have introduced. Right? So then what are gamma mu's? Either are those matrices or are those something else? Right? If you have to declare the gamma mu's as matrices, then they are fixed numbers, right? They cannot transform. Once you have introduced these sphere binds, right, it gives us an option that of declaring either gamma a's as fixed matrices or gamma mu's as fixed matrices. Right? And we will declare the gamma a's as fixed matrices. Right? So that we can make the general coordinate invariance manifest.
In the flat space
So
limit,
we can change the definition. Ultimately, only thing is it should reduce to the in the flat space limit. To
Yes,
flat limit.
that's what. So the guidelines for constructing the action is that in the flat space limit, it should reduce to the correct action, and it should have in general chord space, it should have both general coordinate invariance and local Lorentz invariance. Okay? So these are the guiding principles.
Otherwise, something is tensor or not.
That's up to us to declare.
Okay.
See, we can declare how it transforms. Right? As long as we make sure that it's consistent with whatever you know. Right? So writing it this way, right, it's clear that in the flat space it reduces to the standard gamma matrix because this is this identity matrix.
Yes.
Right? It's also clear that in chord space, okay, as I written, this is invariant on a general coordinate transformation, right? Because this is manifestly a contravariant vector, and psi bar del mu psi is covariant vector. Right? So the only thing to check is local Lorentz transformation, right? That's going to be non-trivial, but that's the only thing that we have to check now.
So going in this way, we are telling that we are leaving untouched sides under general coordinate transformation.
We are
Leaving untouched under general coordinate transformation, the spinner doesn't change. That means
exactly. So you are declaring that psi doesn't transform on a general coordinate transformation, right? Which basically means that we are declaring that the psi that we use is like these variables.
with
Right?
A index.
A index, that means there's a flat index. Right? So these indices are called the flat index, and the mu nu index are called the chord index. And the chord index, because you can multiply by E mu A. Okay? For the Dirac index, the analog of the chord index doesn't exist. Right? So there you know how Lorentz transformation acts on it, but we had no a priori idea of how to general coordinate transformation on those indices. Right? So there the only choice was to declare them as the analog of the flat indices, right? And that they don't transform on a general coordinate transformation. Okay? But then you have to make sure, of course, that the action can be constructed in a general coordinate invariant fashion. Right? And for doing that, we have to use this replacement. Yeah, that when there is gamma mu, we will declare this as E A mu times gamma A, when gamma is being fixed matrices. Okay. Now it's clear that this transforms as a vector on the general coordinate transformation, and hence the total Lagrangian that we wrote down transforms as a scalar. Okay. But to make sure that it transforms as a scalar and a local Lorentz transformation, we have to do something more.
There was one mu index in E mu A. With the help of that, we connected the different E mu's at different points.
No, not at different points. At the same point, we converted the mu index to A index.
E mu A. I am telling about
The E mu A, yeah.
E mu A. We got a transformation rule how it connects to different spacetimes.
No. We didn't. The E mu A is defined point wise, right?
Yes.
So it's not trying to connect one spacetime point to another spacetime point. See, all these transformations are happening at a given spacetime point. So this transformation is all x, x, x. Right? We are not trying to change the space time points. It's that the index structure is changed from the flat index to a curved index or vice versa.
Yeah, in some sense I am telling that because at that one index in E mu, there is a parallel transport concept there is vector part.
Yes.
But for psi you cannot do like that.
Well, for psi, as I said, this the notion of parallel transform that we had introduced earlier, based on general coordinate transformation, that doesn't exist because everything is a scalar. Right? But under local Lorentz transform, so now you have to also ask whether under transport there is a local Lorentz transformation acting on the field, right? So now the parallel transform you could define in terms of local Lorentz transformation, but not the way we had defined earlier, right? Because the earlier definition of parallel transport we had used general coordinate transformation. Under that everything is scalar. So tomorrow and day after there will be no classes, and then next week.